What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Dolphins In Depth podcast. I'm Daniel Oyefusi. Thanks so much for tuning in. Quick reminder before we start, make sure to subscribe to the Miami Herald YouTube page, like, share, comment, all that good stuff, as well as subscribe to the Miami Herald. Now, we are just 1 week away from the start of training camp for the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins rookies, as well as first-year players from 7 other teams, are arriving at 13 facilities Tuesday to report ahead of the start of training camp. So we're getting closer and closer to the start of real football for your Miami Dolphins. We are still previewing training camp, talking all things Dolphins related items before the real on the field work starts. Throughout the offseason, throughout the break between OTAs and the start of training camp, I've been bringing on various guests, and I'm very, very excited for this week's guest. If you're watching on YouTube, you know the face. I'm very, very excited to introduce Travis Wingfield, Dolphins team reporter, as well as the host of the Drive Time podcast. I've been on the Drive Time podcast several times, so I'm equally excited to bring Travis onto the Dolphins in that podcast. How you doing, man?
Yeah, man, I'm trying to cut into the debt that I owe you here as far as podcasts and previews go. So we're going to get one down here. Thanks for having me on, Daniel. I appreciate it. And, you talked about something there that I'm always curious about with other people that work in the league and report in the league and things like that. I feel like there's like 12 days where it's like football's back. And it's like once the new league year starts, once free agency starts, once the draft starts, what's your official start of the football season?
Oh
Opening day?
man,
I feel like it's opening day to me. I don't know.
I don't know. There's just something about the first day of training camp. It's like
Yeah.
first day of school vibes. I love that, because I do enjoy this break. But once you wake up and you're like, all right, we're going to training camp in Miami Gardens. It's hot as heck out there, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
That's like the real first day. So yeah, we still
And it's
got
like
about
6 months of it's on every day for 6 months, basically.
exactly. We still got a week, but again, really, really excited. I know I was on the Drive Time a couple weeks back where we were talking about the defense. So I wanted to bring you on because again, not a lot of like Dolphin specific stuff news going on right now. But like I said, some kind of tangentially related stuff. Over the past week or so, ESPN has been releasing their position rankings for every position on the field except special teams, I believe, through a poll of coaches, execs, scouts, players. And the Dolphins were very well represented on this list, which I think is a testament to a roster that I'm very high on. I know you're very high on. A lot of people are very high on this roster as we enter a season with big expectations. We could go list by position by position. I know Christian Wilkins was a honorable mention on the defensive tackle list. So was Jalen Phillips for edge rushers, Xavier Howard as well. Jalen Ramsey landing in the top 10 for the cornerbacks. But one thing that I really wanted to highlight that was a surprise to me, but not like a surprise in a bad way, was Javon Holland, third-year safety, landing number 5 amongst the top safeties in the NFL. And I say that as a surprise to me only because maybe like I'm kind of in the South Florida Miami bubble, and maybe I just didn't know that he had that much buzz, across the league. This was a guy that I've loved his game since his rookie season. That Ravens game on Thursday night was kind of his, welcoming party when he was just all over the field doing a lot of different things. I think he had a really good second season as well. But to see him at number 5, like a top 5 safety, that really just again speaks to the respect that he has across the league. And again, he's already regarded as a fringe top 5 safety after 2 years. Vic Fangio, new defensive coordinator, has spoken about how he loves his game and how I think that he could have a true breakout season in year 3. What are your thoughts on Javon Holland and kind of what to expect from him in his third season with Vic Fangio?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wonder how much of that came off the heels of Vic Fangio saying, like, "What do you love about Javon Holland?" He's like, "What do I not love about Javon Holland?" Right? Like everything he
Yeah.
does is at a high level, and I think that coming into last year, he probably had that type of trajectory in terms of like. Remember Brian Baldinger coming down here and just raving about Javon Holland. Pretty much anyone that came down to
Yeah.
Dolphins camp was like number 8. He's pretty special now, and I think Daniel, where the perception you're talking about, maybe where it doesn't match up to what you saw in that number 5 ranking, was last year. We saw all the injuries the Dolphins had at cornerback. And I thought that really put Javon kind of, I don't want to say in a bubble, but he played so much in the post where there were just so many snaps where he didn't have an impact because he's so far away from the football, because he kind of had to safeguard that deep part of the field in that man heavy, zero coverage type of scheme the Dolphins like to run a year ago. And I just think that if you can kind of unlock him more, I think that's what this defense should be designed to do, is to get, we've seen Vic Fangio do with the Niners and with the Bears with Eddie Jackson and the Broncos and Justin Simmons, and just gets production out of that safety position. I think if you can really unlock Javon in terms of just utilizing all the strengths he has from not just a physical skill set, but anticipation skill set, that's when you can really see him take off. And, I know we're not talking about Madden ratings, but I never comment on Madden ratings, but I almost did earlier this week because I saw he had an awareness of like 84. And I was thinking to myself, I'm going to talk to Daniel tomorrow and I'm going to ask Daniel, how many times have we seen him in practice, like drop into a certain, coverage and then peel off somewhere else out of his responsibility and make a play on the football? I don't know about that ranking, but number 5 safety sounds about right to me. So I was happy to see him get pretty high up that list.
Yeah, you speak to how much he played in the post as a deep safety compared to his rookie season, just because of the injuries and the responsibilities changing. One of the things I was talking about with a group of friends yesterday and over the past couple of days is we've been kind of like just discussing the rankings. I've a bunch of beat writer friends across the NFL that obviously cover different teams, so they have different perspectives. But one of the things that you can't really quantify is like, a lot of times you see people do kind of box score dialogue. You just look at the stat sheet, say, all right, they have this many interceptions, this many tackles, this many sacks. This is the type of player they are. But one of those things that you can't really quantify, especially for a guy like Holland, is, how many plays he actually prevents, the deep plays that he prevents, just because of his range, his ability to cover the entire field, and opposing offenses and quarterbacks just not throwing the ball. I mean, there's just like no quantifiable measure for that, and that's one of those things that maybe doesn't always show up on the box score, but on the tape it does. So we're like I said, we're both really high on Javon. I think that it could be a really, really big year for him, like you said, with the trying to kind of track record and the history that Vic Fangio has with safety. So top 5, again, maybe really can't say he's one of those guys who's in the dark, because top 5. I mean, this is a holistic poll of different people across the NFL. So shout out to Javon for that. Another thing I wanted to bring up is just the number of guys who weren't just named top 10, but were like fringe top 10 guys. And I'm really looking at who maybe was in the honorable mention receiving votes, or maybe didn't even receive votes, that could be in that top tier group the next year. And to me, I think 2 guys stand out, that being Christian Wilkins and Jalen Phillips. Again, those, in their respective position groups, they were, in the honorable mention group. I'm going to quickly read what someone had to say about Christian Wilkins as well as Jalen Phillips. One moment. So again, defensive tackles, honorable mention, Christian Wilkins was the first player named, and a high-ranking NFL official told ESPN, he's a complete player, versatile, rugged, tough, high motor. And that's the perfect way to describe Christian Wilkins. I mean, the impact that he's had specifically against the run and just being able to shoot gaps over the past 2 seasons. I mean, you could say, I mean, there's guys who are flashier, maybe they have the stats, but even Christian leading his position group in tackles the past 2 seasons, setting records for tackles for a defensive tackle. I mean, you could say like he is one of the most disruptive run stuffers, or I don't want to say run stuffer, just run defenders in the NFL. Well, I mean, what have you seen from his play and really his maturation? Because obviously I'm entering my 3rd year on the beat, but you've watched him from his rookie season. Where have you seen him really growing the most?
Yeah, I think, he's always been so process driven, process oriented in terms of his regimen. I think that he's just really committed and found what works for him in terms of how to get himself ready, how to, allow himself to be able to play what was like 85% of the snaps last year, which is just an ungodly amount for a player down in the trenches. I mean, you just don't see that very often. And over 1,000 snaps last year, if you can include the playoff game. And that doesn't necessarily take into account all the stuff, like you talk about context. Like, we don't always have context for this stuff, right, without watching the tape. But all the times he retraces a screen or gets out wide after a quarterback breaks the pocket and flags him down, it's just relentless energy, like you mentioned. And, the way he produced in the back part of the season, those last 5 or 6 games, he was unblockable at times, Daniel. Like one gap, two gap, if he's playing head up over the tackle or the guard or kicking inside to a one tech, like it just didn't really matter. I think that maybe the pass rush, I think there's 2 reasons why he wouldn't be in the top 10 there. Is number one is the group of defensive tackles they have right now in the NFL is maybe the best position in the league in terms of just the overall talent. And then 2, the pass rush stats haven't quite been what the run game stats have been, because I think if you look at run stuffing, he might be the
Top of the
best.
league. Yeah. Yeah. In
Yeah,
terms
like
of
it's
run
a
stops
very good
and
argument for that. As
yeah.
far as the maturation and growth, like I don't know that anything pops off the page at me, because it's just been so linear. Every year he's gotten so much better, and that's not how it always works, right? But for him, he's just taken a little bit more each year. And I think to me, that's a real testament to his dedication to the craft and the way he's so process driven.
Yeah, for sure. And then, going on to the other player that I mentioned, Jalen Phillips, he was, as well as Christian, the first player, the first edge rusher listed in the honorable mention group. And an AFC executive told ESPN he has huge upside. He was raw coming in, but a big athlete, and he plays his butt off. We're going to keep it PG here, expecting a huge year from him. So again, Jalen Phillips, 15 and a half sacks over his first 2 years. I think that for me, where he showed a lot of the growth in the second year was becoming that every down player. Sometimes having issues against the run, and maybe that really, I think that kind of limited his snaps as a rookie. But if you speak to position coaches and players around him, he really did work on becoming an all around player. I mean, he's always been like the prototype, but really marrying that to the on the field, having a plan. He's one of those guys where sometimes the box score doesn't show. I mean, he didn't have as many sacks in his second year as his rookie year, but there was no denying the impact that he made. And again, sacks aren't the end all be all. But if you're watching the tape, there's no doubt that he was arguably the Dolphins' most disruptive defender, especially like similar to Christian. The end of the year is when he was really playing his best ball.
I look at the pass rush productivity almost like you do with batting average on balls in play in baseball. And I apologize to the audience who's not big into baseball. I make those references in the
That's
podcast
me. So you got me lost already.
So it's essentially what they're trying to do is even the playing field in terms of, how lucky are you compared to how good you are when they put the ball in play. And when it comes to a pass rusher, you can't control how fast the ball is coming out of the quarterback's hand. And I thought, I think he had 28 QB hits last year, Daniel, and like 70 something pressures. And I lost count of how many of those, pressures and hits were results of the quarterback getting the ball out in 2, maybe even less than 2 seconds. So he can't control that. All I can do is go beat the tackle in front of him. Or like you mentioned, the running game, I think a big testament to where he improved in that area shows up in his ability to rush from the 3 tech and go up over a guard, because he did a lot of that last year that helped free up, Ogba when he was healthy, then eventually Bradley Chubb too. But I think if I had to pick a breakout player on the Miami Dolphins in terms of the national spotlight, because I thought last year he was so productive and so valuable to this defense, it would have to be Jalen Phillips because of the things you mentioned, the makeup, the pedigree, the effort he plays. If they talk about Christian Wilkins' effort, man, there was several times last year, like I think back to the Packers game where Rodgers got out of the pocket and it looked like he was going to have a first down, and here comes 15 from the other side of the field, chasing him down and cutting him down short of the stick. So the way he plays, the physical makeup, the way he works, it's very similar to Christian Wilkins to me in terms of just how they've kind of, developed their games. And I see a similar trajectory in terms of, I just think every year it's going to get better and better and better.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really excited about with the defensive front and just the arrival of Vic Fangio is I think that, we talked about how different of a scheme it's going to be kind of conceptually. And I think that last year, even over the past couple of years, the Dolphins have been known for being, an aggressive blitz happy team. And I think that at some point teams are prepared and, they make changes. And I think part of the adjustment from the opposing teams was getting the ball out quicker. So a lot of times, that's why when you look at like some of these deeper level stats, you'll see like the Dolphins pass rush win rate, which ESPN defines as, how quickly defenders beat their blockers in 2.5 seconds. In most cases, the Dolphins had a lot of players registered pretty highly on that metric. It's just that opposing quarterbacks were getting the ball out so quickly. So now you add, you add Jalen Ramsey to this defense. You add a kind of conceptually different defense that forces quarterbacks to hold the ball a little bit longer. A half second is a lot of times the difference between, a pressure, a sack, a strip sack, and you having a big play. So I really do, I agree with you. I just have a really high hopes and high expectations for Jalen Phillips in year 3. I think this is the year where it shows up on the box score.
I think they were third behind Dallas and Philly, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of team pass rush win rate, which, you see on Twitter, it's like, how the hell is that the case when, they didn't have the sacks or the defense allowed X amount of points? It's like, yeah, I challenge people to go back and
Yep.
watch that Jets
Number
game. I know it was
three.
a brutal watch, but there were so many plays where Flacco was like getting blasted and the ball, he's like parallel to the ground and the
Yeah, and
ball somehow
the
comes.
ball
He's
somehow
complete
gets
passes. Craziest game I've ever seen in my life in that regard. And there was a lot of
yeah.
Jalen Phillips getting after the quarterback in that game. And it was a microcosm to me to the rest of the season.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was actually watching some Dan Feeney. I think it
Nice.
was Feeney
Yeah.
film, and not only did Phillips stand out, but Christian again in that game, just being dominant on the defensive line. So yeah, two guys on the defensive front that we have high expectations for. Wrapping up the position rankings, we got to talk about QB1. Tua Tagovailoa, and he didn't rank among the top 10, but again, he was one of the honorable mention players in this list. And again, we know the strides that he made in year one under Mike McDaniel, leading the NFL in passer rating, throwing a career high 25 touchdowns. And well, I didn't know this, reading this, he even out of the pocket, he led the NFL in QBR. But what the NFL coordinator said, I think what was really telling. He said, I thought the first 6-7 weeks of the season last year, he could have been the MVP. I was impressed with his growth. Head injuries are complicated, but I like the direction he's headed. And then another AFC executive went on to say he's got very good timing, touch, anticipation, and accuracy, along with good pocket feel. Top mobility and arm strength, may not be at the top of the league, but he's a true point guard who gets the ball out quickly and distributes it to his playmakers, which he's done a good job of. A lot of those things we've seen: the accuracy, the anticipation, the feel in the pocket. Going into year one with Mike McDaniel, I was of the mindset that I was very bullish and very high on what he was going to be able to do with this offense, just because of the track record and of this Shanahan style scheme that we've seen with Jimmy Garoppolo and others over the years. But I don't know. I mean, truthfully, I don't know if anyone could have expected some of like the high point flash moments that we've seen. I mean, even the 6 touchdown passes
Yeah.
against the Baltimore Ravens, the stretch that he had in October and November, when he was quite literally like the most efficient quarterback in the NFL, just pinpoint accuracy. I was reading Warren Sharp's football preview, and reading the Dolphins chapter, and even before then, there's a chart of where all the quarterbacks from last year are ranked, and you look at Tua, and it's number 1, number
Yeah.
3, number 4, number 5, number 6. And I say that all to say, like, where's the next room for growth with Tua? Because I mean, when you're top 5 in so many metrics, it seems like you can't really improve much. But I think the cool thing about Tua's position is that I think that there is like a lot of room for growth. Like McDaniel mentioned it with himself in the offense. Like, as good as the offense was, there's so many things that they can do to be even better. For you, I mean, what does that look like in year 4 for him, year 2 of this offense growth?
Well, I think we can kind of tease the play caller segment here a little bit and talk about
Yeah.
what Jordan Rodriguez mentioned with the way Kyle Shanahan and obviously, the rest of that tree kind of devises their concepts where they draw the play up on the whiteboard and then they use different colors to build variations off of that. And,
Yeah.
we'll talk about this, and they built off of how, once you run a play, like now the whole league has it on tape and you have to kind of, adjust to their adjustment to your original play call. So I think that when you get into the second year of this offense, and I've tracked this stat, Daniel, going back on my podcast, tracking back to the Atlanta days, the San Francisco days, the Washington days. Every time Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel, who's with him, arrived in a new place, that second year saw a massive jump in offensive production. And I think it's because they can get into the deeper portions of the playbook, the third, fourth, fifth variation of a concept or a passing play. And I think that's where you've really seen Tua take ownership of his career, of this offense, of the team in general, the organization, as the guy. And he's definitely, been empowered to do that by his head coach. I think was such a valuable asset to the Dolphins offseason last year was Mike McDaniel being like, dude, you're the guy. I've built this team in a way, Tyreek Hill, I wanted to maximize your strengths as a passer. I think the Dolphins did that, in a really strong way and came back this year and got even better in that regard. So I think for Tua, you mentioned some of the things, like everyone wants to talk about the things he can't do, right? He's not going to throw the ball 80 yards off of his knees. He's not going to, run directly to his right and zip the ball like a shortstop back across the field. And that's okay. That's like 2% of plays that happen in the NFL ever. So it's not the things that consistently win for guys. And I think that where Tua can really, just take his game to the next level is he did the hard stuff. You mentioned those stats that Warren Sharp posts, which I always get a kick out of those things because people want to discredit it because like I saw one yesterday, like Daniel Jones is in the grouping. So therefore it's not a legitimate stat. It's like, but yeah, so was Burrow and Hurts and Herbert and, Josh Allen, Mahomes, all these guys that everyone loves. I think that for Tua, like he's done the downfield, the intermediate attacking to Tyreek and Jalen and, Trent Sherfield last year and River Craycraft, but maybe just be a little more willing to take, the check down, take what's less there and get the ball out of your hands. Obviously stay healthy because, you talk about the discourse around Tua last year. A lot of folks said he couldn't play, Daniel. Like this guy couldn't play the position, right? The number 5 overall pick in the draft, a guy that everyone's talking about his first year in college that everybody was swooning over. All of a sudden he can't play the position. Now you've seen that conversation shift towards, well, if he stays healthy, and that's, that's legitimate. I get it. He's
there's a lot of goalpost movement, I will say. I mean,
it's
there's
crazy.
a lot of goalpost movement. We could have an entire we could talk all day. We could talk all day about Tua. If you're asking me, I think he's a lot closer to top 10 than, kind of being the last guy mentioned in the honorable mention section. And I keep on saying it. Like I kind of came to Miami not like I don't watch a ton of college football, so I didn't really have like a lot of preconceived notions or biases about Tua. I just saw a guy who, with a lot of kind of moving parts around him the first 2 years, and maybe not the most ideal situation, just go out there and play hard. And he wasn't great his first 2 years. I mean, he himself said sometimes he struggled with the playbook. He was coming back from injuries and whatnot. But even my first year was the 2021 season, and I was impressed by some of the things that he did in terms of the accuracy, and just making the most out of what maybe wasn't the most ideal situation. And then you get more stability around him, some more empowerment, and you see what he can do. You're really seeing him, and I just feel like not only on the field, but kind of like overall, like he's not much. I'm not much older than him. So it's just the overall maturation, not only as like a football player, but as a person, and just kind of being more comfortable in your own skin. And we spoke about this last year and, kind of watched it, but there is something to be said about just feeling more comfortable in your own skin in the way that kind of goes into the way you perform and whatnot. So again, I'm very bullish on this team, as you can tell. And Tua is one of those guys who, again, I think that, the ability is not the question. I expect big things for him in 2023.
That's why, I listened to the Around the NFL podcast, NFL Media's main show. And like I said, this time last year, it was, they're going to go as far as Tua can take them. And then, like you mentioned, he's in the MVP conversation really up until the injury at the end of the season. And now I'm listening to that same podcast and they're talking about, is he the 10th or 9th best quarterback in the NFL? So it's like he's
that's amazing to go from, we don't know, to go to like legitimately question whether he's a starting caliber quarterback, to say he's in the conversation for one of the best 10 quarterbacks. I mean, that's pretty telling. And again, I think there's a lot of goalpost movement because a lot of people that don't want to admit they were wrong about him. So you kind of start to change the discussion. Like he could play. He can play. I'm excited to watch him this upcoming season.
And Jordan was on that podcast, Jordan Rodriguez, and she said that her hot take was she believes that if Tua does stay healthy, which is the caveat, right? And I think it goes without saying at this point, but if he does, she said that she would put him into that elite tier. Like she would replace one of the guys they had in the elite tier with Tua because she thinks that he's ready to take that step. And I think he is too.
No, most definitely. All right, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back on the other side of things, this Travis kind of foreshadowed, kind of teased. We're going to talk about that great narrative podcast, the Playcallers, the Shanahan style offense, the Shanahan coaching tree, and give our thoughts on that, McDaniel's comments, as well as more. So stay locked with us. What's going on, everybody? Still here on the Dolphins In Depth podcast, talking all things Dolphins with Travis Wingfield, my special guest. Now, in the first half, we were talking about the latest ESPN positional rankings, holistic polling of coaches, scouts, execs, players on where the top 10 players at each position in the NFL, as well as, players that are right on the outskirts of that. The Dolphins, as I said before, were very well represented in that list. In the second half, I want to shift gears to a phenomenal narrative podcast that was conducted by Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic. If you haven't listened to it, it's called the Playcallers. Repeat, the Playcallers. Everywhere you can get podcasts, I would very highly recommend you listen to that. It includes focus on the Shanahan coaching tree, the Shanahan style offense that has really sprouted all across the NFL and is well represented. Really starting from Mike Shanahan and his son Kyle Shanahan, and kind of the sprouting of that with Mike McDaniel, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, as well as many others. Where to even start with that? 5 episodes. I thought one thing that stood out to me was just the overarching notion that nothing that all these coaches are doing is like it's not like they're creating something completely brand new, but it's the innovative twist and the continuing evolution of a core concept. So you have that Shanahan style offense with the West Coast, passing schemes, the zone running concepts, and the different ways that it can be put together. And I think that it starts, obviously with the Denver Broncos, but then, with the Houston Texans and Mike McDaniel being a QC there, and, some of the cool stuff, like he designed a program in 2006 where, to put the whole offense together, where you could kind of go back and look at the offense, and then they kind of fast forward to the now Washington Commanders and just the intense competitiveness with all those guys there. And then everyone starts to kind of go to their own different spots. And now with Mike McDaniel, with the Miami Dolphins. I wrote about this, before the San Francisco 49ers game last December, I believe it was, but it has been cool to see, and Trent Sherfield spoke to this as well when I interviewed him for the story, but the way that McDaniel put his own flavor on, that Shanahan style offense. Because again, he's working his way up as a QC, and then he's, a run game coordinator and offensive coordinator. And, Mike McDaniel speaks about the different ways that he's, just trying to, be resourceful, be of value, and, provide input. He talks about how, he worked with Chris Forster to really hone the run game, because that's where he saw that he could really make an impact. And a lot of people, I think we entered the first year thinking, all right, well, this is going to be a run-based offense, so they're going to run 30 times a game because Mike McDaniel is a run game corner. It's like, no, this isn't just kind of some kind of run game branding. This is like a legitimate football coach. And one of the things that stood out to me, because he mentioned it to you in the first interview that he conducted after he was named head coach, was the idea that on offense, you're always trying to manipulate the defense. It's not just about executing the offense, but what can you do to stress the defense and manipulate the defense? And there were two examples that stood out to me in terms of, the constant evolution. One was, I believe they were talking about when it was RG3's rookie year, and McDaniel himself said that that's the year that he really think that he contributed more than, McVay, LaFleur, because he was doing so much with the run game, and, they were doing such innovative stuff with zone read and pistol. And he talks about how teams had kind of started to catch on to that. And I guess they were kind of overloading to the strong side of the tight end, and how he called an in-game, he kind of made this in-game audible where I'm not gonna lie, it was a little too in the weeds for me. And I'm a football guy. I'm an X's and O's guy. It's a little too wordy, but essentially he had a in-game adjustment, an in-game audible to kind of counteract the overloading to the strong side. And McDaniel was like, that was the first time that I thought, oh, like that was kind of his like eureka moment, like, oh, like I can do this, like I'm for real. And then he goes on to mention how the week of preparation for the Christmas Day game against the Packers, they had a certain way of always doing the bootlegs, like you fake it and then you roll out. But because the Packers were playing their defensive end so far out wide, that wouldn't be as effective. So he thought, okay, we're going to scratch the roll, and we're just going to have Tua, stay where he is after, kind of stay in the pocket where he is after the fake. And then that was the play that, they got the long touchdown pass to Jalen Waddle, the long catch and run. Um, all that is to say, I left listening to the play callers, and I'm thinking there's no way that Mike McDaniel isn't going to have answers for whatever adjustments teams have made and are planning to make. Because obviously you have a full off season of tape on this Dolphins offense that kind of caught everyone by surprise and was throughout the season one of the most big play efficient units in the league. Obviously, there was the stretch late in the season, games against the San Francisco 49ers, against the Chargers, where the offense chipped up a bit, and you saw a defense start to make some various adjustments, whether it was the linebackers getting more depth, the cornerbacks playing more press and whatnot. But I just left the podcast thinking like there's no way that they don't find answers. Like the players are too good. When you listen to the stories of these players, of the coaches, these coaches are like too driven. They spend way too much time obsessed. Like I can't even imagine how much time McDaniel's probably spending watching film and thinking of answers. But just the constant evolution. Like this offense isn't necessarily going to be like 180 degrees different. But I'm just so excited to see the wrinkles that they incorporate in year two. I mean, what were your thoughts on the podcast and especially McDaniel's kind of portion?
Yeah, just first real quick though, I think it's funny how, the Dolphins seem to get so docked for their slump they went through, right? Because every team does that every year. Like every single player goes through a stretch where they're not playing like they were at their peak, because no one sustains their peak unless you're like Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan, right? I think it's crazy. Like Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs lost a game in Indianapolis last year. That stuff happens in the National Football League. So, but you kind of walked me into the part that was my biggest takeaway from the podcast was McDaniel's. I just like, I've always known that he gets it because we're around him every day, when you're fortunate enough to be around him as well every day, with press conferences and just see how he interacts with the media and just how he sees the game and how he can give you these really golden answers most of the time. But I just thought he got it from what you talked about with that in-game adjustment, talking about that I think it was the Washington Dallas week 17, like winner in, loser go home game. And he said they were overloading the front side. And he was like, hey, if we can just get to the backside, the not tight end side of the formation, we can really exploit the way that they're overplaying this. And all of a sudden they're going to have to adjust to that. And then we can readjust to that. And that was kind of his coup de grace. And then you talk about the Packer game and the 84-yard touchdown to Waddle, like to change that play on the fly. And to understand that Tua, with a rusher in his face, has the ability to kind of drop the arm angle and sling that thing out there and put it in a position for one of the best playmakers to go make a play. And he sure as hell did.
That was a crazy play. That was a crazy play.
There's so much involved. You can see the way Tua is reading the field. There's a whole lot that goes into that, but that's for another podcast. But just the humility that he just displayed, where he talked about, you'd have to be an absolute. I loved how he bragged a little bit about his coming out party with that Washington game, but then also talked about the humility that or just displayed the humility, I should say, and in regards to, you'd have to be kind of a fool to think that you're the one that's making it all click as the play caller, because we have great play calls that don't work and trash play calls that do work all the time in this league.
Because of great players that just make the trash play calls work. Yeah.
And what does he have in two receivers here that are two of the best in the business? And I think it makes a ton of sense. And I think the way that those adjustments that he's able to make in those instances and the way he spoke to us, I don't know if it was right after the season, Daniel, or when we came back for OTAs. I think he talked about it both times, about how he felt he had 100 things that he had to improve upon. And every rookie head coach should feel that way. I mean, I think that comes with the territory. Like, this is a tough job, and it's all encompassing. You're not just focusing on, how's the front side playing this run. You're head coaching the football team. So you can't just, be singularly focused like that. So for him to get maybe a broader view, a more worldview of his entire operation, to go back and see where it didn't really click necessarily. And I think, using the word operation conveniently there, the operation was one area that they can improve, and getting play calls in faster, making sure they're not, pressed up against the play clock, and not just, trying to get the snap off without that sense of urgency, like we got to go, but not taking flags as well, and getting, misaligned and all that stuff. So I think that my biggest takeaway from it was that this is a guy who understands the game at a level that I just don't think many people do, and just life maybe, and like situational, like self-awareness. And I think that he will take that trait and take it back to the drawing board, to what didn't go right among things that many things that did go right in 2022, and be able to adapt to those things. And that was my biggest takeaway, was just seeing like, this is a guy that clearly understands, strengths and flaws and weaknesses and how to, raise the weaknesses, solidify the strengths, and hopefully the Dolphins are the beneficiary of that, because I think that he's in a great position to really put his stamp on this offense this year and even take it. I mean, number 6 offense in the league last year with all those injuries. Like
Yeah.
that's really impressive. I think that they can go even higher this year if things go the right way.
Yeah, I don't know if it was him or someone else that mentioned that, again, going back to kind of the late season kind of hiccup, against the 49ers, the Chargers, and to an extent, the Packers. I don't know if it was him or someone else. One of the speakers mentioned that, when McVay came onto the scene with the Rams, I mean, they were just killing the game with, kind of the bunch sets and the zone with Todd Gurley and whatnot. And, I believe it was a Bears game against when Banjo was defensive coordinator. I believe that's what it was, when he kind of tripped them up, and then Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl took that game plan and kind of used that as a template to trip them up. And it took them a year to kind of get back to that point. Obviously, they made the trade for Stafford, and sent Jared Goff to the Detroit Lions, but it did take a bit of, re-innovation and a bit of evolution to what they do on offense. So they did change that offense a bit, to get back to that point. So I say that to say, again, I think that I was very impressed by the way they bounced back against the Bills game. And then obviously the Packers game was kind of, it was kind of 3 games all in one, with whatnot. And I do think that there were significant, changes just in, a week, 2 week span. So again, you have the entire offseason, like you said, to go to the drawing board. I think that a lot of the additions that they made on offense, were to kind of counteract some of the struggles that they've seen. I think I saw it early on in OTAs and minicamp. We all know Tua is so successful and so good in that intermediate part of the field. But like you said, just kind of taking the check down, working parts of the field that offenses maybe don't pay enough attention to, because they're focused on, getting beat deep and getting beat over the middle of the field. And I think whether it's, Robbie Chosen, and he had a great offseason workout program, whether it's Devon A. Chain and the things he can do potentially as a receiver, I think that they made additions to this team that will allow them to not only improve, but evolve. It's not just about improving, it's about evolving it. And I don't think that it's one of those things that it's necessarily going to be shown on the on the final season rankings, because again, when you're top 5, top 10, like it is hard. It is hard. Like you're playing, like McDaniel says it all the time. Like the other team is getting paid as well. So I don't think necessarily we're going to see like a jump from 6 to 2 or whatever it may be, or maybe I don't know. Maybe they do drop maybe a ranking or 2. But I think situationally, and that's what's big for me. Situationally, I think that they're going to be able to do some things that maybe we didn't see last year. Whether that's the short yardage situations and working the ball in different parts of the field.
Yeah, you talked about earlier, I think in the first segment, about manipulation of the defense and, how McDaniel wants to attack an opposing defense with where they're vulnerable and, things of that nature. I think the Niners game was a good example of that, because I think Fred Warner came out after that game and said, like, we knew we had to get depth in those drops because Tyreek and Jalen are so dangerous, on those digs, those kind of deeper in cuts in behind the linebackers. And all that does is it expands, right? And that's that entire podcast was about creating space, and defense's responsibility is to remove space and condense things. And I think that, you talk about the check down, you give more emphasis to a player like Devon A. Chain catching a short pass, because you miss a tackle, he's got the speed to make you really pay for that. Or, getting the tight ends more involved in the passing game. I think we saw the way this tight end room was kind of constructed in a way that's, emphasis on good blocking and maybe situational pass catching, kind of adding that extra offensive lineman into the formation. I just think that they're going to have more of a second pitch this year, is my estimation. Like the Tyreek and Jalen, 3,000 yards is awesome, and I hope it happens again. I could see it happening again, but to be able to, force teams to take that away and then open up something else, an entirely new vulnerability. If you can do that, all of a sudden defenses are scrambling to figure out how the heck do we defend these guys, because they have an answer to our adjustment to their bread and butter. And now, like, we have to answer that because they can just nickel and dime us all day. And we again, talking about great offenses, we saw Patrick Mahomes really change the way he played the game last year and take that short stuff. And they were a Super Bowl champion because of it. So I'm not saying that's an easy comparison or carryover there, but like there's money in the banana stands, as it were. Like, take the short stuff, take the checkdowns, and get the football into playmakers' hands. And just make the defense defend more space. I think that's what the Dolphins, if they can do that, they can be even better this year.
Yeah, it's a constant cycle of adjustments,
Yeah.
readjustments, getting back to what you
It's
like to
so much.
do and just kind of working off variants. I gotta say, I was, over the years, I've been kind of like more of a defensive guy. I don't know, like when I played Madden, I loved, just stop because, everyone loves scoring points, but I just always like loved, figuring ways to stop. Maybe it's also my Baltimore roots watching the Ravens over the years and whatnot. But, just like this past year with McDaniel, just the different things. And, I've learned so much about offense, just kind of listening to him. I'm really excited to see what he and this unit does in 2023. Travis, we could have went the entire day. I wanted to keep it short, speedy, to the point. I know we're gonna, but I know we're gonna talk a lot over the next couple of weeks and next months. But I want to thank you so much for joining me on the Dolphins In Depth podcast. I want, I'm sure 99% of my listeners listen to you, but if they don't, I want you to go ahead and plug everything that you, all the great work that you do.
Yeah, man, I appreciate having me on. Looking forward to getting you up there back in the stands for practice. I love watching those with you. The four eyes is better than two, so I appreciate having you alongside me there. You mentioned the Draft Time podcast. I'll be having daily post practice podcast on that, written pieces up on MiamiDolphins.com, and you can follow me on Twitter. My last name at Wingfield NFL.
Must follow, must watch, listen, read, all that good stuff. Thank you so much, Travis, for joining me on the Dolphins In Depth podcast. That brings us to the end of another edition of the Dolphins In Depth podcast. As always, thanks so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe to the Miami Herald YouTube page, like, share, comment, as well as subscribe to the Miami Herald. We're going to have a ton of training camp previews, what to watch out for as rookies report today, and we have vets reporting next week ahead of the first practice. We'll be back next week to look into storylines on both sides of the ball as we get right into training camp. But until then, you guys take care and talk to you soon. Bye.